A warm welcome to you, and today the 27th of August marks 10 years since the 2010 Constitution was promulgated, and joining me is a special guest, that is PLO Lumumba, to discuss the hits and misses of the document.
Thank you very much, Alan, for inviting me to this conversation, which I think is useful as we commemorate 10 years since the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. Yes.
Thank you for creating time. So let's just get into it. And I want to start this interview by understanding. It's been 10 years and we've had the hits and we've had the misses. From where you're sitting from, is there any particular concern that you feel should have been handled from the word go, that should have made the conversation different as of now, or the document was well on from the word go?
Not at all. The document has a long history, as you remember, from the CKRC draft to the Boma's draft to the first referendum in the year 2005. We remember the Kilifi, or so-called eponymously Wako draft, which was rejected. Then we had the post-election violence. Then we had this constitution. Then, of course, this constitution, as you know, was the harmonized draft, and the harmonized draft was taken to Naivasha by the politicians. And in many ways, there are certain fundamental aspects of it that were then interfered with, and the architecture was then distorted. And you see those distortions in the area of devolution, which could have been done better.
Let's talk about the judiciary. For a very long time, the judiciary wasn't able to dispense its duties because of its powers. Now, the 2010 Constitution came and we saw the implementation of the Supreme Court, the highest court on the land. 2017, the elections are nullified, something that a lot of Kenyans weren't necessarily expecting. As a lawyer at the center of it all, what did you take away from the whole process?
First of all, I think that the judiciary has acquired operational autonomy. They are now better resourced than they were before. I know that the central administration, particularly the Treasury and the Executive, is seen sometimes to starve them of funds, and this irritates the Honorable the Chief Justice and I'm sure other judicial officers. And that independence is good. It now boils down to the individual judge doing that which is good. Of course, I think that the Supreme Court has done a good job. There are certain cases where they have given advisory opinions which are very good. There are certain cases which they have made decisions with which I do not agree, one of which is the nullification of the presidential election. Yes. I do not think, and if you look and talk to serious jurisprudence and constitutional lawyers, yes, they'll tell you that there was no reason to justify the nullification of the president in the year 2017. There wasn't. And subsequently, you've seen in a number of jurisdictions in Africa, they have rejected that jurisprudence. They rejected that jurisprudence in the Buhari Atiku case. They rejected that jurisprudence in the Chamisa Mnangagwa case. And the decision that was arrived at in the Chakwera Mutharika case was on a totally different trajectory, because in that case, Chakwera won the elections, and there were palpable mistakes that were made by the electoral body. But in this one, and that is why the decision was not unanimous. Yes. I keep on asking people, if you want to look at the best judgment out of that, is that of Professor J.B. Ojwang, the dissenting judgment of Professor J.B. Ojwang and Joki Ndungu. Yes. So in that regard, I hear people saying it is historical. You don't make decisions to make history. You make decisions on the basis of the fact. In any event, tell me which election is perfect. If there is a perfect election, then it is rigged. In this particular case, it was quite clear that Mr. Odinga lost the election. And in any event, there were mistakes, but those mistakes were not of such a nature as to undermine the will of the people of Kenya. And it is instructive that Mr. Odinga chose not to participate in the elections in October. Very different from Chakwera in Malawi. Chakwera knew he won the elections, and that the decision that the pronouncement of Mutharika was indeed wrong, and he went to the election and he won the election. Exactly. But in Kenya, they shied away because they knew they would lose. Yes. They knew they would lose.
All right.
So I don't support that decision, and that is why I think it was not unanimous.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about your time back. At some point in your career, you were the director of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, and your tenure was served with a lot of criticism from political leaders, and that eventually led to your exit a year with your team in name of the transitioning to the new ethics and anti-corruption at that time. One would argue that this felt like an ouster, so to say.
Of course.
Was this a sign that the country wasn't necessarily ready to deal with corruption?
At that time, remember, it was during the period when we had this government, the government that was the transition post-election government. There were elements within the opposition and elements within government. And I remember very distinctly that when we were making the constitution, my friend Charles Nyachai always reminds me this. When we sat in Parliament and we were going through the new amendment, the act that now ultimately led to the creation of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Yes. There were provisions, and I kept on objecting to the politician. The chair at that time was Raila Odinga, and then there was Musalia Mudavadi, Saitoti Mutu. I kept on objecting and saying, you are diluting this act. Yes. And I remember James Orengo distinctly telling me, we are the makers of the law. We'll make it as we deem fit. And of course, at that time, the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission had started targeting politicians. We were taking ministers and senior government officials. And I think the coming into force of the Constitution was a godsend to the parliamentarians. And I think if you listen to the parliamentary debate, because the bill that abolished the KSCC was passed at midnight. And one of the candidates, I think it is the governor of Kitui now, said that if you allow these people to remain in office, all of us will be in jail. So we were good riddance, because I think that there was no political will at that time to fight corruption. It was simply what one would call, and I'm using this word very loosely, window dressing, because we were keeping up, as the English would say, with the Joneses. You are the first country in 2003 to sign the UN Convention Against Corruption in Merida in Mexico. You have the African Convention for Prevention and Combating Corruption. You have come into power promising the world that you are going to fight corruption. There is the specter of Anglo-leasing. You have this group of people who are beholden to nobody. They are riding roughshod. They don't know how politics is played. You eliminate them and eliminated. They abolished our offices. They abolished our offices, but thank God, they brought in the ESCC, which I now think is doing a good job. Because political will has also changed. I think I have many problems, not many, I have a few problems with Mr. Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya. But I think in the area of corruption, he has demonstrated necessary goodwill. And I think that has served to energize the ESCC. It has served to energize the ODPP. It has served to energize the DCI. And you can see what is happening. The kind of prosecution that we are now seeing are not politically actuated. They are informed by evidence, and one can only pray and hope that it shall be intensified.
All right. Now, you've spoken about an interesting thing on your answer. You talked of Senator Jameson who say, we are the lawmakers. Oh, yeah. Now, when you come to the parliamentarians, this has also been a big concern in terms of the Constitution and amending of bills and passing bills. They've been accused of doing it for their own interest. In the coming days, do you feel like there's something that needs to change so that this power is sort of checked?
Of course. You know, one of the things why we recommended, for example, because the Kenyan people told us, is the Salaries Commission, is that we are moving, we find a parliament which is very inward looking. And I remember as a young lawyer when a QMI commission was put together to look at the terms and services of parliamentarians, I appeared before them and I told them, don't increase the salary of members of parliament. You'll attract people into politics whose only desire is to make money. Parliamentarians and people who are serving, don't give them pensions. They are not pensionable. In other countries, parliamentarians are only paid allowances. You go to places like Cuba, you go to places like Sweden. Of course, they did not listen to me. And today, one of the easiest ways of becoming rich is to be a parliamentarian. You have a grant for a car. You have a loan for a house. You have constituency allowance. Some of them get allowances of fuel up to 20 million in a year. Then you have a salary of nearly 1 million. You are not captain of industry. I mean, that is the easiest avenue to comfort in this country. And to answer your question directly, you now see that Parliament is overly enthusiastic when you are dealing with matters that concern their welfare. And this must be checked, and it can only be checked by the vigilance of the people. It is the people throughout the world where there is democracy. It is when the people make demands that parliamentarians listen. Unfortunately, in Kenya, because of our political culture and because of weak public opinion, which is very ethnicized, it is very difficult to mobilize people on a Kenyan issue. Because you can mobilize them, then they are animated ethnically, and then they lose sight of what is in the best interest of the people of Kenya. And the politicians know that. Yes. They know that they can manipulate. They know that those who are making noise do not have the stamina to stay with an issue. And that, I think, is one of the problems that we have in this country, and is one of the problems that we must deal with going forward, to ensure that we de-ethnicize our politics and to depersonalize our politics, because our politics is driven by ethnicity and ethnic cultism. Ethnic cultism, and of course, we also know that is driven by money.
Let's talk about the presidential address yesterday. The president said that Kenyans should seize the moment right now and use this moment, and especially the BBI document, as a tool towards amending certain clauses in the Constitution. From where you're sitting from, not so many people are sold on the BBI idea. First question, are you sold on the idea? And secondly, is it the right route to take in terms of amending the Constitution?
The BBI, Building Bridges, is a name which has been given to the initiative between President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga after the electoral problems in the 2017. So it is a ceasefire document. Yes. It's a ceasefire document via which Mr. Raila Odinga then had a rapprochement with President Kenyatta, and on the 9th day of March 2018. So it now says that it under that aegis that we are going to have and examine our constitution and see how we can repair some of the things that need repair. To that extent, the initiative is one that I do not condemn, because I hold the view that when parliamentarians interfered with the harmonized draft in Naivasha, they distorted a number of things. They distorted the executive arm. Nobody ever asked that we have a presidential system a la America. They distorted the legislature. They created a Senate, which is a lower house. I've never heard of that anywhere in the world. In the people representation, they had an architecture which has made it difficult to implement the 1/3 rule. In the commissions under Chapter 5, they created too many commissions, most of which really are just moribund institutions which are just siphoning money out of our public coffers. In the land area, we could have done better. In devolution, we created too many devolution units. At the Bomas of Kenya, we had only recommended 14 regions, with Nairobi being administered like you administer Abuja in Nigeria or Washington, D.C. I think that should be repaired. And of course, there is a sense in which they also retained the provincial administration in its full splendor. So you have this parallel system that sits alongside the devolved units. In the financial area, they created this distortion which is now bringing the spurt between the Senate and the CRA and the Treasury, and starving the devolved units of funds. So I think that this opportunity, whether I like BBI, and I see BBI, the BBI, not the constitutional amendment, the BBI, in my view, is a Trojan horse, which some politicians want to use to occupy political space. And so to that extent, I'm not wedded to the BBI, beyond the fact that it gives us an opportunity to re-examine the Constitution. To that extent, I agree with the President of the Republic of Kenya that let us be positive, let us clean up the Constitution a little bit.
All right. Just before I let you go, I want to understand where we strike the balance. When it comes to the Constitution, the parliamentarians have over time been accused of constantly amending the Constitution and wanting to make changes which goes against the spirit of the Constitution that needs time for it to bear fruits as time goes by. So where do we really strike the balance of giving the Constitution time for it to play out and where it needs to change?
The reason why I support amendment of certain aspects of the Constitution is because we bungled it. If we had listened, if we had had the Boma's draft, for example, or largely gone with the harmonized draft, then we would not be amending the Constitution now. We'd simply be talking about enacting legislation to enable the Constitution to be implemented. But we made fundamental mistakes, courtesy of politicians at Naivasha. And therefore, that is why we are amending the Constitution. If you look at the American Constitution, which is over 200 years old, it has only been amended 27 times in the 200 years that it has been in existence. And the first 10 amendments are to be excluded from that, because the first 10 amendments, which are normally referred to as the Bill of Rights, were actually made almost at that particular, just about the time that the Constitution had been done, and it was the federal Constitution. And I think that we must avoid this. Remember, at independence, when we regained independence in 1963, we started by amending the Constitution to solve temporal problems. In 1964, we were already amending the Constitution to abolish the office of the Prime Minister and then to introduce the office of the President, which Jomo Kenyatta then occupied. Between 1963 and 1969, the Kenyan Constitution had been amended 27 times. 27 times. And that is how many years? From 63 to 69, that is just 6 years. 27 times. So distorted was the Constitution, even by that time, that it was reorganized and reissued as Act Number 5 of 1969. And to strike the balance, therefore, is we go back to the basics. Ask ourselves, what did the people of Kenya tell the CKRC? And what did the delegates representing the people, the 629 of them, say at the Bomas? So we go back to the Bomas. Even the Bomas, of course, is not perfect. No constitution is perfect. But it's closest to what the people of Kenya said. And then propose amendments that address those issues. And that is possible. I don't want to speak about the BBI report, the latest one, because it is not in the public domain. But the one that was issued a little earlier was very disappointing. And that is why they knew it. They recognized that it was very weak, and they took it back to gather further views and to have consultations with others who had walked this journey. So those are the things that I think should happen.
Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I wish you the very best of luck, and keep up the good work. I think that we've got to give some of these ideas the oxygen of publicity.
Thank you very much for your time.
God bless.
All right.